Good. Okay, so let me summarize what we did last time. So there's one sort of difference really between studying cosmology and cosmological solutions and all the things we've done before, which is that there are a few basic formulae, and actually now we are going to do nothing except go round and round, rewriting them over and over again and extracting more and more different consequences from them. So the GR work, in some sense, some of it is over. The GR work consists of saying that dx squared is minus dt squared plus a of t squared, and this is a maximally symmetric space. And it has a curvature. I mean, you can actually write it once, perhaps it's d rho squared over 1 minus a rho squared plus rho squared d omega rho squared. So there's no mystery in this maximally symmetric space. And k is positive or 0 or negative. It can be scaled to the values plus 1, 0 or minus 1. And that's the situation we have here. Now implementing Einstein equations on this kind of structure gives us ultimately some equations which are supposed to determine A, but they determine them in terms of the energy momentum tensor, which I've already written down last time, which depends on pressure and density. And so finally we get the so-called Friedmann equations, which for today's purpose can be written like this. Many ways to write it. Today I'm going to write it as A dot squared minus 4 pi by g, 4 pi g by 3 rho plus 3 p sorry, rho a squared. This equation doesn't have p. Rho a squared equals minus k. So this is one of the equations. Okay, and it's first order and it involves k. There's another equation which is obtained by combining both the Friedmann equations in their original form, or alternatively by studying the energy momentum tensor, and that says conservation of the energy momentum tensor, and that says that rho dot over 3 rho plus p is minus a dot over a. A dot a over a, in fact, is the Hubble parameter h of t. So these are the two equations, and now we are going to take this system and we are going to extract a bunch of physical consequences. But as I said, I don't think we'll be needing any more general relativity per se. Now there's one more input, which is the equation of state. I'll put it in a box here. Which determines the pressure in terms of the density. This equation is a bit over. W is a constant. This is an assumption, this equation of state. So for example, you can pick some other equation of state, whatever you like, and you can write a paper entirely by putting a new equation of state into this. And that's why the journals of general relativity and cosmology are so fat. There are lots of papers, because anybody can, because this can't be derived from it. This is an assumption. Okay, but if you take this simple linear assumption, then matter Matter and pressureless dust are the same for the purpose of this course. So this has W equals 0 being pressureless. Radiation has W equals 1 by 3. And now the third thing is either called vacuum or this. Symbols look the same as each other. Lambda is for cosmological constant, V is for vacuum contribution. It's the same thing. We'll be using V most of the time. This has effectively W equals -1. And the curvature, this is a dangerous one because you have to first decide whether you are, so the curvature can be formally included into this list, okay, with a particular value of W which is -1/3. But of course you can easily get confused because if you have any equation which has curvature already on one side, then you're not allowed to include curvature when counting all these densities. Right? You can't do it, can't have it both ways. You can bring the curvature to this side and say I'll lump it along with these terms. Okay? And right from this you can see that basically curvature is the same as density which scales like 1 over a square because k is constant. So if the density scales like 1 over a square, it behaves like a constant k. That's really the content of it. But I emphasize again, it's very easy to make a mistake by saying that among the contributions to this row, there is matter, radiation, vacuum energy and curvature. In this equation, only 3 contributions are there to row and the fourth one is written out for you. You have to be careful about it. Okay, good. Now we derived some basic laws last time about the way just from these equations, in fact basically from this equation, using the equation of state. Okay, so there are 2 things. One is that from this equation, by fixing a particular contribution out of these 4, you can solve this equation. For example, if there is no density at all, it's a highly unphysical situation, completely empty but curved, expanding universe, okay, then A dot goes like root of minus k, so A grows linearly with time. So there is a characteristic time dependence for that case. So these are the pure cases. I am reviewing what I did last time. Pure cases, by pure I mean assuming that one of these 4 is present and all the others are absent. But later in this class, or maybe if we don't have time, then next time I'll consider the most general combined case also. So the pure cases. So now I'll be using the abbreviation M, R, V and K. So M tells us that A scales like T to the 2/3. We did this last time. Radiation tells us that A scales like T to the half. Vacuum tells us that A scales like exponential of a constant times T. And curvature tells us that A scales like T. These are the 4 possible behaviors, but again people are free to invent other forms of other contents in the universe which was whatever the reason might be scaled in some other way because of some other equation of state. So these are the standard 4 options. We derived these last time. And what else did we do last time? Okay, there are 2 things left incomplete. I'll just mention those. Yeah, one of the things we discussed last time was the Milnor universe, which is the case where there is only curvature and nothing else. Okay, so it's a linearly expanding universe. So the pure cases, this gives the Milnor universe. What about the others? They all have names. I think this one is the so-called matter-dominated situation, and this gives a space-time that's called Einstein disorder. Okay. Notice that since these are pure cases, each of these 3 cases is without the contribution of curvature. But curvature of the 3 manifold. The 4 manifold will always have curvature, solving Einstein equations non-trivially. But in these coordinates, which are co-moving coordinates, there is a preferred 3 manifold. That curvature is k because it's maximally symmetric, so there is only one constant parameter. And that's the parameter which is assumed to be absent in these three cases and present exclusively in the last case, wherein on the contrary there is no density. Okay. So this is called Einstein de Sitter. I don't know if the pure radiation dominated one has some special name. The cosmological case is interesting. So in the cosmological case, you have or the vacuum energy case, you have an interesting fact which I'll mention now. In this case, the energy momentum tensor T mu nu, if you remember, it was diagonal rho p p t, and I think with one index up, it's probably minus. Good. This is correct. And this, of course, was the basis why we said that there should be a nice isotropic solution, because the space part is proportional to identity, 3p's. But in this case, in the vacuum case, actually P is equal to minus rho is the equation of state, or otherwise we already knew that, and therefore this thing is really minus rho, minus rho, minus rho, minus rho. Okay, of course we knew that because the cosmological term in Einstein's equations is proportional to the metric lambda times G mu nu. When you raise one index, G mu nu becomes delta mu nu, so it's proportional to the identity in 4 dimensions. Now, what can you expect of a space whose energy momentum tensor, which is sourcing that space or space-time, has such a great symmetry that it's completely isotropic and homogeneous in 4 dimensions rather than 3 dimensions? It seems reasonable to guess that the space-time itself could be isotropic and homogeneous in 4 space-time dimensions. Mind you, this is not a physical requirement, because this requirement adds the fact that it's isotropic and homogeneous in time in some sense. Okay? So, of course, now you would be puzzled because the metric that we are looking at here, as long as A and A of t is a function of t, doesn't look like there's any chance that you can have a universe which is isotropic and homogeneous in time. But, as usual, we are caught by something, and that thing is that it can be isotropic and homogeneous in some other coordinates. Okay, that thing may not be visible in these coordinates, which are adapted to understand the isotropy and homogeneity only of the 3 space. Okay, and which have a very particular choice that the coefficient of time is 1. Okay, this is a very anisotropic choice between space and time. This one is 1, this one is some function. Okay, so in other words, this let me write, could be expected, and in fact it's true, to produce an isotropic for space-time. Four-dimensional space-time. And it does. So now I need to rub out something, but we keep needing these equations. Like anything. Okay. Here. This you can remember. And in fact, this case, okay, so actually I don't need to write it there. In fact, this case is called de Sitter. For k greater than 0. It's one way of thinking of de Sitter space-time, but in coordinates which are not natural for somebody who wants to think about de Sitter space-time. In any case, I'm not going to prove this fact for you, and I'm not going to right now discuss de Sitter space-time, but I think it would be a reasonably good project for somebody to do. So by Thursday, I'll try to produce for you a list of projects. And one of the first exercises would be to write a metric which exhibits the isotropy and homogeneity of de Sitter space-time, and then exhibit that it's the same space-time as the pure vacuum solution with exponentially growing T of t. So in other words, it can be written in Friedman-Robertson-Walker language, those coordinates which are co-moving coordinates, or it can be written in some other coordinates where its highly symmetric nature is manifest. How many Killing vectors will it have if it's isotropic and homogeneous in all of space-time? 10. So only 6 of them were required. 4 more are accidental because of this form of the energy momentum tensor. Yes.
Why is k greater than 0 for this?
Sorry?
Why is k greater than 0 for this?
K greater than 0. Actually, y is k greater than 0. Sorry, what have I said? K greater than, no, I don't think I wanted to say that. I have no idea why I said that. K is equal to 0. Okay, these are all cases where k is equal to 0. Excuse me. So what happens is that in these cases, the 3 space in these coordinates is flat and the 4 space is expanding in time. So the 3 space is part of it is expanding. Okay, but in de Sitter coordinates, it's neither any part of it is flat nor any part of it is expanding. It's homogeneous and isotropic. Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you for correcting that. Because these are all pure cases. These are all cases where, so these 3 cases being pure means k has to be 0. Okay, now let's look at one non-pure case for an interesting historical interlude. So historical fact. Now, one thing is that the first case, the matter-dominated case, is the most natural for people to have considered since they ever learned to solve Einstein equations, because there is matter in the universe, okay, and there is radiation too, but you could hope that the radiation doesn't matter much. There is not any great evidence that there is curvature, so you could hope that the curvature is 0, and until the last 10 years there was no evidence that there is a vacuum energy, so you could hope that thing is 0. So this was a very popular cosmological model for some time. Okay, and of course it gave an expanding universe, expand with the scale factor expanding like this, so consistent with observations of that time. And the reason why everything has changed from then till now is that observations have become much better. So this is a highly experiment-driven field where observations now tell us that we can't simply pick one of these or the other, and I'll show you in a few minutes precisely what is the experimental fact which rules out pure Einstein de Sitter. Okay, because I'll tell you now, in fact, you can use this to calculate the age of the universe. In each of these cases, you can calculate the age of the universe, and you find that if you find that age comes out smaller than the age that you estimate for some star or something by some method, then assuming that estimate is good, then of course you have got a wrong prediction. So this age of the universe, I think that this comes out to 10 to the 9 years, and that's a big shot. Okay. So that's one historical fact. The other is that, okay, supposing you had Einstein de Sitter, and supposing this had been discovered, I think it was, at a time when the universe was not known to be expanding. It was thought perhaps that the universe is static. Okay. So here you have this, remember that these forms are all dictated by homogeneous and isotropic 3 space. That, let's say, it was known. But somehow people hope that a solution will come out which doesn't have expansion. So A of t should be constant. Now you can see that A of t is not constant in this and this case, any of them individually. But who is to say that by combining any 2 ingredients out of this, you can't manage to get an A of t which is constant? Okay? It's worth a try. Of course, it's not worth a try in today's system because we know that the universe is expanding and now we don't want a static universe. But Einstein wanted a static universe, and his idea was, let's take this, which is a good solution, and let's look at these ingredients and find out which of them is going to help me to make it static. And in fact, historically, this was the idea for which he introduced the cosmological constant. He said, let me add that term to the equations. Okay, it's an ad hoc term, you can add it with any coefficient. And then let me hope that the vacuum energy plus matter-dominated universe has a solution where A of t is constant. We can simply do that by putting A dot equals 0 in these equations and seeing what you get. Okay, so let's put it, so let's try matter plus vacuum energy. Yes. Yes, yes. Well, okay, I should say that the form of the energy momentum tensor is of course fully isotropic in 4 dimensions. It doesn't, I don't think it follows obviously that there has to be a solution which is isotropic in 4 dimensions, but it's reasonable to expect there would be such a solution. And it turns out that there is a solution, and that the proof is that you find the solution. When you write the solution of this, then you realize that there is such a solution. Alternatively, if you just take the behavior A goes like T and plug it, A goes like e to the T and plug it into the Robertson-Walker metric and then analyze that metric carefully, you will find 4 more killing vectors which you hadn't thought about before. Once you found 10, then you are guaranteed that it's a maximally symmetric space because that's the maximum number of killing vectors. Then it's up to you to find the coordinate transformation which makes it look very, very symmetric, in which time and space appear on equality. Okay. So how are we going to solve these Friedman equations for, so try to find a solution. I don't think radiation will change things much, but involving matter and vacuum energy such that A dot equals 0. And the result has a name, turns out to be the result. If you take the minimal possibility, which is only matter and vacuum energy, you could also otherwise throw in radiation. It wouldn't change much, I think. These powers are, experimentally it's important, the difference, but I mean, conceptually both are expanding at some fraction or some power of T between 0 and 1. It's not such a exchange. Anyway, this combination is called the Einstein static universe. And if I understood my history right, it's never guaranteed, Einstein introduced the cosmological constant because it helped him produce a static universe. And when he found that experiments actually show, when Hubble showed that the universe is expanding, then Einstein didn't need the cosmological constant. But now, being a person who liked aesthetics in equations, his point was, but then why is it there? It was the biggest mistake of my life, the famous quote was that I wish I hadn't thought of it because now it's there but somehow we don't need it anymore. Okay. So after gap of many years, as of the last 10 years, we don't need it anymore because in fact lambda is rather fairly conclusively shown to be indeed extremely small but non-zero and positive. Okay. So as far as, but of course it doesn't, since it's extremely small, it doesn't do the job that he wanted it to do, which is fine, but it doesn't make the universe static. Anyway, let's see how we are going to make a static universe. So we just put A dot equals 0 in these equations and then proceed as follows. So first of all you get 8 pi g rho A squared upon 3 equals k. But we want k to be 0. So we want this to be 0. That's right. No, it's sorry, excuse me, that's wrong. K we don't necessarily want to be 0, so it's actually a combination of this and curvature. Rho, remember, now is a combination of the contributions from the two things. So some combination of them could be 0 because rho associated to vacuum energy is negative. Can be negative because vacuum energy satisfies P equals minus rho. So either pressure or density can be chosen negative. Now the other Friedman equation, which I probably haven't written here, where did it go, was the one with the acceleration. It can be derived from these two, but let's write it. Yeah. So the other equation was A double dot equals minus 4 pi by g. So 4 pi g again, that's 3. Rho plus 3p k. Okay, I hope you remember the structure of the equations. Initially we got this and this. Then by doing some manipulation between the two, we were able to extract this one, which is very useful. Okay. So this is one equation, and the other one for constant A is simply that rho plus 3p equals 0. Okay. So how can rho plus 3p be 0? Well, we are allowing. So now you look at this and you'll say this corresponds to an equation of state P equals minus 1/3 rho, and that's the equation of state for curvature. And here's where you'll be making a mistake because of course the whole point is that curvature is exhibited separately. This rho and p in these equations as we are using them now are for these three things: matter, radiation and vacuum, not for curvature. In fact, the reason it's 0 is because we've taken a double dot equals 0. So it's the anyway, the point is that it's 0 summed over only matter, radiation and vacuum and not over curvature. So if you are taking only matter and vacuum energy, then this equation simply says rho m plus 3pm plus rho vacuum plus 3 rho vacuum equals 0. So here we see that when we say rho, we really mean the sum of densities. When we say p, we mean the sum of pressures of all the types of content in the universe. Okay. So now what we can we say about this? Well, p for matter is 0. Matter means pressureless dust. So that's gone. And what's the relation between rho vacuum and p vacuum? I think I've written something wrong. This is p vacuum. Okay. So p vacuum is minus rho vacuum. So this term is minus 3 rho vacuum. So from this we get that rho matter is twice rho vacuum. Rho vacuum in turn can be, it's not a real density, it's the effective energy density of the vacuum, but it can be related to the cosmological constant. So we have got a precise prediction for the density of matter and relation to the vacuum energy. Okay, that's one relation. And the other equation then tells me, okay, actually this is all because the other equation just determines K. Right. And this one is rho matter plus rho vacuum. So K is then determined to be 8 pi G. Rho matter plus rho vacuum, which is the same as 3 rho vacuum, A square, 1, 3, cancel the 3, so that fixes K. Alright, so this will lead to an Einstein static universe with one parameter. That parameter is the common value of K or rho vacuum or rho matter, each of them determines the other one. So this is the way in which you can get a static universe. It's really there just to prove a point, and that point is that if you wanted somehow for the acceleration of the expansion of the universe caused by matter, if you wanted to halt it somehow, then you could halt it by introducing a curvature and a vacuum energy. Okay, and I think also the sign should. I'm wondering if I've got the right sign. Yeah. So rho m is twice rho lambda, and those are positive. Rho m has to be positive because it's ordinary matter. So K has to be positive. Okay. So positive curvature and a cosmological constant of fixed amount will solve all the equations and halt the expansion of the universe. So one good thing is that even if this static solution is not of our interest, we've learned that it has an effect of slowing down the expansion, so that's good. Okay, so then we can use it. It's an ingredient. We have not used all the ingredients in doing this because we used a new ingredient, A dot equals 0, which actually is not. That's it. Anyway, good. Okay, now let's switch to a new subject, which of course will be input into this, which has more and more to do with how you connect this metric and these equations to observations. Okay. I had said in advance that I can't do justice to this subject. This is really the subject called cosmology, and I can recommend here Weinberg's book, which is extremely good and which is full of very current, up-to-date experimental detail. But of course, being a book on cosmology doesn't only emphasize the GR aspects, it goes on in pages over pages and pages about basically observational facts. Okay. Anyway, so the key idea which is something we've encountered before in a different context, is the redshift. So redshift is the shift in the frequency of a light ray compared to what it was when it was emitted. Now, we've seen many kinds of redshift. Actually, the first time you learn about redshift is when you learn about Doppler shift, because something emits, a source emits a wave, and it doesn't have to be light in that case, it can be sound also. As long as the source is moving, or the person receiving it is moving, or anyway they are moving relative to each other, then there will be a shift in the frequency. Obvious effect due to the stretching of the ray of the wave, and correspondingly change in the wavelength. And direction of motion will determine whether the shift is up in frequency or down in frequency. Down is called redshift. Okay. The second time, so that is something you encounter in basic physics. Now we encountered it earlier in this course in the context of gravitation, and we found that if you are at two places in a gravitational field, one where the field is stronger and one where the field is weaker, then you will experience a redshift. That's called the gravitational redshift. And that was due entirely in our discussion to the G00 part of the metric. Now, of course, our metric now has no G00 part, it's just one. So you might think that there's not going to be any redshift associated to this metric. But it turns out that the T dependence, which we didn't have before, in A of T, in fact creates a redshift. And the best way to see it is to just go through the usual exercise of writing the geodesic equation for a radial light ray in this FRW universe, which anyway we should have done, because it's an exercise that one can do very easily. So, and just to whet your appetite, let me mention that this redshift will be somewhat different from although it formally, the formulae will be similar to those for Doppler type of shift, it has a different conceptual meaning which I find very intriguing, which I'll talk about later. Okay, the radial equation for a light ray. So of course the geodesic equation is always this. And we have to supplement it by the null condition, and then we get the equation for a light ray. Now if mu is 0, then we have time. That's the only one of interest to us. The second thing to remember is that for a light ray, the dot is with respect to an arbitrary parameter called the affine parameter, which you should not think of as proper time. Okay? So we can give it an arbitrary name. Maybe I'll call it lambda. So dot x dot mu. Lambda is an affine parameter, and the equations really don't depend on the choice of lambda.
Lambda and proper time are divided by the linear transformation.
No, the proper time is 0 on a null geodesic. That's the whole point. So that's why. Otherwise, first of all, it's not linear in any case. If it was a massive particle, you could choose any affine parameter, which is any function of the proper time, and you would still get the same equation if you did everything carefully. If you remember, we introduced a metric on the particles work line and all that. If you go back to the discussion, the problem is that among all the parameters, the proper time becomes a useless parameter in the case of a photon, because proper time never elapses for a photon. Okay, it always goes on null trajectories. So you need something else, but something else is available in the form of an arbitrary affine parameter. Okay. Now the equation of interest to us is the one involving t, the coordinate time. This is the t that appears in the scale factor a of t. Okay, so t double dot. So now we have to be very careful, because up to now we were putting dots to differentiate d by 2. Okay, so let me not do this, it will confuse you. Dot we will reserve it for d by dt. Okay, the Friedman equations involve a dot and a double dot. This dot is not d by dt. So therefore I will write it like this, d lambda squared of t. Now t is a function of lambda, it's a trajectory. Okay, plus what? Since I have chosen mu equals 0, this is gamma t, and then two things here. Now in the FRW metric, which gammas were non-zero? We'll have to go and look at your notes. Do you remember? No, don't do it. I'll wait for you. That's what I'm waiting for. So the three options here turn out to be rho, rho, theta, theta, and phi, phi. Now we'll drop theta, theta, and phi, phi, because we'll take the light ray to be radial. So we are interested in a trajectory where theta and phi don't change. The light ray just goes through the origin of our space in our coordinates, which is there's no harm, because remember that our space is homogeneous and isotropic, so it really doesn't matter whether we took the origin or any other place. So that leaves only gamma t rho rho del lambda rho square equals 0. There is no gamma t t t, because gamma t t t would require the time derivative of g t t, but g t t is 1 constant, so that's not. Okay, so this is the geodesic equation. We supplement this by the null condition. The null condition is from the FRW metric is ds squared is minus dt squared plus a of t squared d rho squared upon 1 minus d rho squared. And this we put to 0. Again, d theta and d phi terms we have dropped for the null light ray. So this relates to me. I can now take this on the other side and take the square root, and so this says that dt is equal to a of t d rho upon root 1 minus k rho square. So I can divide by d lambda, my affine parameter, on both sides, and I get del lambda t is del by del lambda of rho over this. So this is one relation between the lambda dependence of t and rho. Okay. Now this I can substitute, so I can use that to eliminate del lambda rho from this equation. Okay. Moreover, I need to remember what is gamma t rho rho. So this, if I remember right, was a dot upon 1 minus k rho squared. So therefore, I can rewrite this equation as del lambda squared of t plus a dot upon 1 minus lambda rho squared times d rho squared. Now conveniently, I see that d rho squared upon 1 minus k rho squared is exactly the combination. Del lambda of rho squared over 1 minus k rho squared is this combination squared. So it's nothing but del lambda of t squared over a squared. So this is the geodesic equation. Now we have enough information to find t as a function of lambda. Actually, that's not even the thing we need. We actually need only del lambda of t. That's even easier because this can be written. Something went wrong. Yes. Good. This is fine. But what is a dot? This is supposed to be a differential equation in lambda, right? So a dot is dA by dt. That's the same as del lambda of a upon del lambda of t. So one factor of del by del lambda of t drops out, and I get del lambda squared t plus del lambda of a upon a del lambda of t equals 0. Now you can immediately see the solution. If you think of del lambda of t as a particular function, then that function differentiated and divided by itself is minus del lambda of a divided by itself. So del lambda of t goes like 1 over a. So from this we get that del lambda of t is, I'll put an arbitrary constant here, upon a. That's the crucial result. Okay. If I differentiate this and divide by this, I'll get del lambda a upon a with a minus sign. That's exactly this. So it's just the integral of that equation. Very good. Okay. So now we also notice that omega naught is like a frequency. Maybe I should have actually called it. We'll call it. Good. So omega naught has dimensions of a frequency because the affine parameter is dimensionless, T has dimensions of time, A is dimensionless. So something doesn't seem right.
It's A by omega.
No, it's omega naught by. How can I get A by omega by inverse time? That's weird. Let's think through the dimensions again. A is dimensionless.
Time has dimensions, sir.
Sorry? Time?
A is dimensionless.
Actually, it seems to me in these units everything is dimensionless.
A has dimensions of length.
A has dimensions of length because it's a scale factor. But you see that then there's a little bit of an issue here. Anything can be given dimension. Yeah, what?
No, usually in the opening coordinates, the x are taken to be dimensionless.
Good. X are taken to be dimensionless. So rho is dimensionless. Then, correct. Thank you. So since k is a number, let's start here. K is a number which we are scaling to 1 or minus 1 or 0. So rho must be dimensionless. That's possible because rho is the radial coordinate only of the 3 space which has an overall scale factor taken out of it. So we are able to assign dimensions of length to A and no dimensions to rho. Okay, that's a convenient choice. There are other choices, but in those other choices, K would have a dimension. That's not pleasant. Okay. So A naturally has dimensions of length. So that's very good. So if A has dimensions of length, actually A has dimensions of time.
Omega naught should be dimensionless.
So omega naught in this seems to be dimensionless, but I'm not liking that very much. A has dimensions of time. Omega naught I want, in fact it will come out to be a frequency whether we like it or not. No, but I think now I know. I think I'm probably mixing up different people's conventions. Because, okay, let's leave it at this for the moment. Let's assign dimension later. I think in a moment, I know what's happening. H bar, we are working in units where H bar is 1. In fact, we'll be using energies in a moment. And energy will have the same dimensions. So omega will turn out to be an energy. I think it will all work out. So let's now ask the following question. Do you want to settle this thing then or can we move on? Do you really want to settle it? Yes.
From the differential equation,
Good.
Then lambda t will be some quantity. Then faster differential of it with respect to lambda plus some number into that variable equal to 0. So the dependence should be exponential.
What do you mean by dependence should be exponential?
No, dependence.
It's log. Now it's exponential, but it's exponential on log of A. That's the whole point. Del lambda of t goes exponentially e to the minus log of A, which is the same as 1 over A. But now let's look at this equation. So lambda clearly has no role or no effect on the dimension because it scales out.
That equation is consistent because both have dimensions.
This equation, everything is dimension. Any dimension pretty much will work in this equation. You're quite right. Good.
So going from that equation to that is probably better.
So lambda has the dimension of the t.
No, lambda actually can be completely dimensionless. In fact, it's the most natural choice. Lambda is independent. It doesn't have dimensions of t. It can have any dimension. It is exactly like, it is like tau, but tau is a proper term on the world line. That can be scaled out completely to be dimensionless. It's completely different dimension from the dimension of t in space time. But maybe there's some natural choice of dimension of lambda in this equation. And it probably depends on that actually. omega you cannot decide what is the... Here if the dimension of lambda is arbitrary, then dimension of omega is equally arbitrary. By scaling lambda you can make omega have anything. Okay, good. So let's leave it like that for now and we'll see what's the natural choice. Okay, now let's come to the physical observation. So what is the physical observation? It's something that we've already looked at before. Supposing I have an observer, this is a very general rule, with 4 velocity u and a beam, a light ray. It also has its 4 velocity d mu, which is just d x mu by d lambda. Okay, then the energy of the light ray, which is the same as the frequency of the light ray, as observed by the person with this 4 velocity, is an inner product of these 2 velocities. We've argued this when we discussed gravitational redshift. In fact, it's nothing but minus g mu nu, u nu. If you think back or look back in your notes, in the case where G00 described the metric of a star, or when G mu nu was the metric of a star, then G00, or even any symmetric body, then G00 will change as you go from, let's say, the surface of the body to high up in space, and that change would cause energy of one observer and another observer, the ratio, to change, and that would be the gravitational redshift. Now we want to ask the question, what is the energy of an observer carrying out an experiment at a time t1 and another one carrying out this measurement at a time t2? So for that, let's first note that it depends on the type of observer. So I can't answer that question unless I tell you what type of observer I have. Okay. So the way an observer is determined will vary from one coordinate system to another. So here we are in the co-moving coordinates, and the observer I want also to be co-moving. Okay. So co-moving observer is nothing but an observer who is at rest in the co-moving coordinates. Notice that this person will not be at rest in any other coordinates, and so it's a very special type of observer. But it's also a natural observer because in some sense we all sitting inside the universe which is expanding are co-moving observers, because whatever planet or star or galaxy we are on or in is moving along with the co-moving coordinates. So we are also doing the same. Okay. When would we not be a co-moving observer? When we would take a particular coordinate value of our time and space, t and the space. See, the space coordinates here used are some coordinates rho. Okay, but they are not the actual space coordinates. They have to be scaled by a of t to become space coordinates. Now, if I chose that I be at a fixed position r, which is a of t times rho, then I am not co-moving. If I am at a fixed rho, then I am co-moving. So I am at rest in the co-moving coordinates. Of course, that's easy to determine then, because G00 is 1 in those coordinates. So u mu, u nu, g mu nu equals -1 determines for me that my vector is 1, 0, 0, 0. So this is the effect, as I already told you, promised, that u will not have a varying factor root G00 as it had in the field of a star, which was responsible for the gravitational redshift. So here the redshift must come from some other effect, not from G00. This is the solution to this equation for an observer at rest. Because rest means u0 is non-zero, all the other components are 0, then normalizing it with G00 being given by the Friedmann-Robertson-Walker form as -1, then this is the solution. Okay. Okay, but if it wasn't Friedman, Robertson, Walker, but Schwarzschild, then this would not be the solution. You if you remember in your previous calculation of gravitational redshift, this term was root minus G00. Because of that, the energy had a factor of G00 in it. G00 here and a root from here, but partially uncancelled. Then if you took the energy at 2 points in space and took the ratio, you would get a difference, and that would be the redshift. Okay, so now that's at least not going to be the source. Because G00 is just 1, minus 1. Okay, good. What will happen instead is that V, which is dx by d lambda, has this form, which is A dependent on the scale factor. This will be the source of the redshift. Okay, so we can write down E observer now. This is minus, so minus, the only component here mu is 0 because of this, but G is diagonal, so only this also is 0. Okay, so it's, and G00 is minus 1, so it's plus d x naught by d lambda, in other words d lambda t. So the observed energy is d lambda t, which we've already calculated. Now it's very easy. Observed energy, and so this is equal to omega naught upon A. So we learned that observed energy at time t2 over observed energy at time t1 is equal to A at time t1 over A at time t2. And this is called the cosmological redshift. When is it a redshift? Now we should be able to tell. Let's fix that t1 is an earlier time and t2 is a later time. Okay, so this is the measurement at a later time divided by the measurement at an earlier time, and it's coming out to be the scale factor of the FRW metric at the earlier time divided by the scale factor today. So if the universe is expanding, then this right hand side is less than 1. The scale factor earlier was smaller than the scale factor now, so this is less than 1. That means the energy observed today is less than the energy that was emitted by the emitter, which means that the light ray has been shifted down to the red end of the spectrum. Okay, frequency has decreased. So redshift, if A of t, if A of t2 is greater than A of t1, if the universe was contracting, then it would be a blue shift. Now, without being any expert in the experimental side of how these things are measured, you can see that we have made an astonishingly powerful correspondence to experimental quantities, because the redshift is the frequency of something that you observe compared to the frequency of a spectral line that was given off by something somewhere else. Okay, of course, in principle, I imagine the ancients must have been a little baffled by this, because how could we find out anything about what the spectral line should have been? This is before quantum mechanics. You only know what color you are seeing, you don't know what color it gave off. But with quantum mechanics, there are definite spectral lines for definite elements, and you can see a line and you can say this is the whatever line corresponding to this particular element. It has to be. But then that line for the emitter was at some frequency, and when we receive it, it's at some other frequency, and we can calculate the redshift. So we can calculate the redshift from our observations. Okay, so therefore we actually learn from that. In fact, you can put it another way, that if we observe a redshift, then the universe is expanding. After all, we don't know from a priori what the universe is doing, but we observe redshifts everywhere we look, then the universe is expanding. Now, of course, many things can go wrong with that. After all, the thing that is emitting could also be moving. Okay, so there's some whole subject called peculiar velocities. I don't know. Do you know this term? Something I don't know much about. So you have to compensate for all other things that could contribute. For example, the thing that's emitting happens to be moving rapidly in some direction. Then, of course, there will be a redshift due to the ordinary Doppler shift that we have to combine with this. So, experiment is never easy to isolate this effect, but there's a clear effect. That's the Purely due to, yeah, exactly. Purely due to the expansion of the universe.
Sir,
Yes.
so if this repeats that logic, why we cannot have any gravitational redshift here?
Why we don't have gravitational redshift is because G00 is -1. This is also a gravitational effect. It's not the one that I found for you earlier. Okay. Okay, here's an interesting thought. In these coordinates, these are co-moving coordinates, right? So from the start, the Robertson-Walker form of the metric doesn't have any G00. That is just fixed to be -1. Okay. So the thing that we earlier called gravitational redshift, which was a shift when I changed my position and due to the G00 factor in the metric, that is not there in this one. Okay. But on the other hand, this is time dependent. Okay. Because it's a time dependent metric, the energy turns out to have this relation to the scale factor, and this embodies the gravitational redshift. Finally, the formula is this one, which is invariant under change of coordinates. So you might change to some coordinates where there is a G00, and you might find that this redshift in the new coordinates is interpreted as due to G00. Okay, quite possible. But in these coordinates, the G00 is not there. So that's the nice thing. And yeah, so here's the effect. Now we keep using T1 and T2. This is normal physics notation, but in cosmology there are two times that are particularly important. The first one is T equals 0, which is always fixed to be the start of time, the origin of the universe, and the second is T equals T0, which is now. Okay, so T2 will be replacing by T0. You have to not get confused. It's a little confusing. T0 will be now, so T0 is later than any other time that we'll be using. Okay. So now we can parameterize the redshift as follows. Let T0 equal today. Then the redshift we want to parameterize by writing that A of T2, which is actually T0 now, over A of T1 is 1 plus T1 is, or let's call this T. So this is just a change of notation. T1 is any time T in the past, and T0 is today. Then A of T0 over A of T, just plug those things in there, is 1 plus Z, and Z is greater than 0 if redshift, and less than 0 if blue. So Z is the name for the quantity that we'll be trying to study and compare with measurements. Good. Now let me just make this comment, and actually today I probably have to stop because I have some other work in 5 minutes. Let me just make a comment that I referred to in the beginning of the lecture. The redshift, cosmological redshift, depends only on A at T1 and A at T2, and not on any details of how A got from the value A at T1 to the value A at T2. Okay? So imagine the following thing. Supposing we were observing a signal, supposing we had control over the universe and we were able to halt its expansion twice. Instead of the universe steadily expanding, so A of T is a function like that. Supposing we were able to take the universe and make it static for some time, then expand a little bit faster, and then again make it static. Yeah. So this is A of T1. So I'm saying compare these two. This is a smooth increase of A of T. This is A of T. This is T, A of T. Normal smooth linear increase of A of T versus A of T doesn't change for some time then it changes a bit faster, and then it doesn't change. So at the end, A of T2 and A of T1 are the same for both of these histories of the universe. Okay, the redshift is the same because it's A of T2 over A of T1.
So this path can be any arbitrary.
This path can be any path, but notice the interesting thing about this new path which I am proposing. In this new path, at the time of emission of the signal, the universe was static, wasn't expanding. At the time we detect the signal, the universe is again not expanding. Okay, but still there is a redshift. This shows you the key difference from a Doppler shift. Doppler shift can't happen unless the source or the observer or both are moving. If both are static, or if the source is static when it's emitting and the observer is static when he's receiving, what they do in between is nobody's business. There won't be any redshift. No. So this shows. Hello. Hello. Nandi, okay. Sorry. So I have to go. So that was the point. Now, of course, this is a theoretical point in a sense. To illustrate it, we obviously can't stop the universe and restart it, and even it's not obvious that there is a solution of Einstein equation corresponding to that. Moreover, experiment tells us that the universe is expanding uniformly. As long as it's expanding uniformly, then it's reasonable and slowly, very slowly. So the experimentally observed value of A dot over A is extremely small. As long as all those conditions are true, then you can use words like the galaxies are receding from each other at a velocity, and then the redshift is really the Doppler shift between receding galaxies. If they are receding from each other, then there is a redshift because of Doppler effect, and approximately that effect is the same as this effect. So I wanted to highlight two things: that in principle it's not at all the same effect because it depends on the endpoint values and not on the velocities, and it doesn't depend on the velocities at times of emission and absorption. But in practice, it is the same effect because the expansion is very uniform and very slow. When it's very uniform and very slow, then you can think of it in this way. In fact, if it was not slow and uniform, you couldn't even be allowed to use words like galaxies are receding from each other. Okay, we'll write next time in next class, we'll write Hubble's law. Hubble's law makes sense as it's normally stated when Z is much less than 1. Okay, but Z in nature can be a lot bigger than 1. Okay, last I heard Z's up to 7 have been detected. I don't know if it is higher now. Huh? 8.4. Okay. So yeah. So you know, if Z is 8, then you can see that this ratio is like 9. Then it's not a slow expansion, and then all the terminology we use in cosmology would just be wrong. We shouldn't use it. Okay, so we have to be very careful in which domain we use it. Okay. Yeah, why? Something else? On Thursday?
Yeah.
What is it?
The topic is yet to be announced, but it's there on the website.
By whom?
Subrat.
Subrat?
Yeah.
Thursday?
Yeah, that's 5th, right?
Yeah, but why would it be on Thursday?
I mean, just ask in the office, they say just for
Okay.
Sir,